David and Eric are both 40 years old. They both live in Columbus, Ohio. They both earn $95,000 a year. They both have $120,000 saved. They both have stable careers, similar families, and nearly identical monthly expenses. From the outside, you'd swear they're living the same life. Then one Saturday morning, they each make one decision. David decides it's finally time to enjoy life. He upgrades his lifestyle, buys the luxury SUV he's dreamed about, moves into a larger house with a higher payment, and starts living the version of success he thinks he's earned. Eric makes a completely different decision. Nobody notices it. There's no celebration, no photos, no compliments from neighbors. He simply decides that every future financial decision has to answer one question before anything else. Will this purchase make me richer or just look richer? They both walk away convinced they made the smarter move. They're both wrong. Because the real decision separating millionaires from everyone else after 40 isn't the car, the house, or even investing. It's something far less exciting. And by the time we run the numbers over the next 20 years, the gap between these two men won't just surprise you. It'll completely change the way you think about wealth. Here's why this comparison matters. Too many financial stories start with one person already having advantages. Higher income, rich parents, better timing. That's not this story. Same city, same salary, same savings, same age, same opportunity. The only thing that changes is one decision. And feelings, well, feelings and math are two very different things. On day one, David feels incredible. He puts $80,000 down on a $620,000 house instead of buying something closer to what he actually needs. His mortgage, property taxes, and insurance push his monthly housing cost to roughly $4,150. Then he finances a $72,000 luxury SUV with another $10,000 down. At 2% interest over 6 years, the payment lands around $1,020 every month. His friends notice. His coworkers congratulate him. Even strangers assume he's doing well. Eric looks at the exact same numbers and reaches a different conclusion. He buys a comfortable $430,000 home instead. He puts the same $80,000 down, keeping his monthly housing cost around $2,850. Instead of financing a luxury SUV, he buys a reliable 3-year-old SUV for $32,000, paying cash. It doesn't impress anyone. Nobody asks about it in the office parking lot. Nobody compliments it at the grocery store. But Eric quietly keeps nearly $78,000 of his original savings invested after his purchases instead of draining every available dollar into bigger monthly obligations. The funny part is that if you ask 10 people which one looks more successful after the first month, almost everyone picks David. That's because visible wealth and actual wealth almost never arrive at the same time. Now let's slow everything down and actually run the numbers. Year 1. David's income is still $95,000. His raises match inflation at around 3%. Nothing unusual happens. His mortgage gets paid. His SUV payment gets drafted every month without fail. But something interesting starts showing up in his bank account. His larger house costs more than just the mortgage. Maintenance averages about 1% of the home's value each year. That's roughly $6,200. Property taxes run close to $8,000 annually. Homeowner's insurance adds another $1,900. Utilities jump by about $170 a month compared with his previous home because he's heating and cooling significantly more space. On paper, he's building equity in a beautiful home. Sounds great until you subtract everything else. The larger property quietly costs almost $18,000 a year before unexpected repairs even enter the picture. Then there's the SUV. Insurance is nearly $2,400 annually. Registration and luxury vehicle taxes add several hundred more depending on the county. Depreciation? During the first year alone, the vehicle loses roughly 15% of its value. That's more than $10,000 gone without driving a single extra mile. Nobody posts depreciation on Instagram. Eric's first year looks almost boring. His smaller mortgage leaves him with about $1,300 more every month in available cash flow compared with David. Instead of increasing spending, he automatically invests $1,000 every month into a diversified low-cost index fund. He leaves the remaining few $100s in cash for emergencies and future repairs. Let's use a conservative long-term average return assumption of 8% annually before inflation. Not because markets move in straight lines, they absolutely don't, but because over long periods, broad U.S. stock market returns have historically been in that neighborhood, although every decade looks different. By the end of year one, Eric's monthly investments have grown to roughly $12,500, including investment gains. It's not life-changing, yet. David's higher payments have also built equity. Roughly $7,000 of his mortgage payments have reduced principal during that first year. On paper, David says, "I've built $7,000 in equity." Eric says, "I've invested $12,000. Both statements are true, neither tells the whole story. Year 3 begins to reveal something nobody notices at first. David receives a promotion. Great news. His salary climbs to just over $103,000. Almost immediately, lifestyle inflation follows. Weekend trips become nicer. Furniture upgrades seem justified because of the larger house. Holiday spending creeps upward. None of these purchases are outrageous individually. Together, they quietly absorb nearly every raise. This is the part nobody warns you about. Higher fixed expenses don't just cost money. They change your definition of normal. Eric also gets promoted. Same salary, same raise. But because his fixed monthly obligations stayed lower, every raise has somewhere to go before he even notices it. His automatic investment increases from $1,000 to $1,300 per month without affecting his lifestyle at all. 3 years into the experiment, David's home has appreciated modestly. Let's assume 3% annual appreciation. His property is now worth roughly $677,000. His mortgage balance has fallen enough that his equity has grown substantially. On paper, his net worth looks impressive. Sounds great until you subtract selling costs, maintenance already paid, higher property taxes, increased insurance premiums, interest expense, and the opportunity cost of all the extra cash tied up every single month. Eric's investments tell a different story. His original invested savings have continued compounding. The monthly contributions never stopped. By the end of year 3, his investment portfolio is approaching $130,000. Nobody can see it, nobody compliments it, but compounding doesn't care whether anyone notices. Now we reach year 5. This is where most people think David wins. His home is worth over $718,000, assuming steady appreciation. His neighbors are selling at higher prices. Everyone on the street feels richer. The SUV still looks beautiful parked in the driveway, even though it's now worth closer to $38,000 after years of depreciation. David genuinely believes he's made the millionaire decision. And, honestly, most people standing in that driveway would agree with him. Eric's driveway tells a completely different story. His SUV has also depreciated, but because he bought it used, the steepest losses were already absorbed by the first owner. More importantly, his monthly investing has never stopped, not through market dips, not through scary headlines, and not through election years. His investment account has crossed roughly $190,000, and the gains themselves are beginning to generate gains. That's the moment compounding quietly changes from something you do into something that starts working for you. The strange thing is that if you only looked at appearances after 5 years, David still seems to be winning. But appearances don't calculate opportunity cost, numbers do. And in the next stage, something happens that almost nobody sees coming. The story that looked obvious on day 1 begins to reverse. Not because David made reckless decisions, but because one simple choice made at 40 quietly compounds into consequences that become impossible to ignore. Year 10 is where the illusion starts to crack. Not all at once, not dramatically, quietly. This is the point where people who looked financially identical at 40 begin living completely different financial lives at 50. David has continued making every payment. He hasn't missed a mortgage. He paid off the luxury SUV after 6 years, and for a brief moment, he feels relieved. Finally, there's an extra $1,020 a month available. Then something predictable happens. He replaces the SUV. Not because the old one stopped working, because after driving a luxury vehicle for 6 years, it's hard to convince yourself to go backward. He trades it in for another newer model worth $78,000. The dealer gives him around $27,000 for his trade after depreciation. The rest becomes another loan. On day one, he thought the payment would eventually disappear. Instead, the payment simply reset. This is one of the most expensive habits high-income earners fall into. Not buying one expensive vehicle, replacing expensive vehicles every 6 to 8 years. Let's do the math. Over 10 years, David has spent roughly $122,000 on vehicle payments, around $26,000 on insurance, approximately $15,000 in registration, taxes and fees, nearly $18,000 in maintenance once the warranty expired, and well over $65,000 in depreciation. On paper, he owned 2 beautiful vehicles. Sounds great until you subtract everything else. Eric's story couldn't look more different. His 3-year-old SUV is now about 13 years old. He spent around $80 on maintenance spread across the decade. Tires, brakes, fluids, a few unexpected repairs. His insurance remained close to $1,300 annually instead of over $2,400. When the vehicle reached the point where repairs no longer made financial sense, he replaced it with another dependable used SUV costing $34,000. Again, paid in cash. No monthly payment returned. Instead, the $1,000 that used to go toward investing had quietly become $1,500 every month because every raise over the decade increased his automatic contribution. Nobody celebrated that decision. Nobody even knew he made it. Now let's compare their balance sheets. David's house has appreciated at roughly 3% annually. It's now worth around $833,000. His remaining mortgage balance has dropped to approximately $445,000. That gives him about $388,000 in home equity. Pretty impressive. Eric's house has also appreciated. His home is now worth approximately $578,000. His remaining mortgage balance sits near $292,000. His home equity totals roughly $290,000. At first glance, David wins. Almost $100,000 more in equity. Case closed. Except, we're not done subtracting. David has paid roughly $75,000 more in mortgage interest than Eric over those 10 years, simply because he borrowed significantly more money. Property taxes have averaged roughly $2,700 more every year. Insurance averaged about $700 higher annually. Maintenance averaged another $2,000 more each year because larger homes simply cost more to maintain. Roofs are bigger. HVAC systems cost more. Landscaping expands. Paint covers more square footage. Those 4 categories alone quietly consumed well over $120,000 during the decade. Nobody talks about those numbers at backyard barbecues. They talk about appreciation, not carrying costs. Meanwhile, Eric's investment account tells an entirely different story. His original invested savings continued compounding. His automatic monthly investments never stopped. Market returns weren't smooth. Some years were negative, others were extraordinary. But over the full decade, assuming an average annual return around 8% before inflation, his portfolio has grown to roughly $465,000. Read that number again. $465,000. Not because he picked brilliant stocks, not because he timed the market, because he consistently bought productive assets while avoiding permanent increases in lifestyle costs. This is the flip point. The story reverses here. For the first 5 years, David looked wealthier. By year 10, Eric actually is. And here's what's fascinating. Neither man's salary explains the difference. Their income stayed nearly identical. Their promotions were nearly identical. Their investment returns were identical whenever Eric invested. The only difference was one decision made at 40, one decision that determined what happened to every future raise. Now let's talk about something almost nobody includes in these comparisons. Taxes. Not income taxes. Behavior taxes. The financial penalties created by perfectly normal human behavior. David's larger house encouraged larger furniture purchases, a bigger dining table, a more expensive patio, a riding mower instead of a push mower, premium appliances when replacements became necessary because cheaper models looked out of place. None of these decisions were irrational individually. Together, they quietly consumed another $40,000 to $60,000 over the decade. Behavior follows environment, The house didn't force those purchases. It simply made them feel reasonable. Eric experienced the opposite effect. Smaller space meant lower furnishing costs, lower utility bills, less maintenance, less temptation. His environment naturally reinforced saving instead of spending. That's a hidden return very few spreadsheets calculate. Now let's pause for a moment. If I only showed you David's mistakes, I'd be doing exactly what every personal finance influencer does. Reality is more balanced than that. There are absolutely situations where David's decision wins. If home appreciation averages 5 to 6% instead of 3% for an extended period, the larger property's equity can dramatically outperform expectations. If David purchased in a supply-constrained market where inventory remained extremely limited, appreciation alone could offset much of the higher carrying cost. If he renovated strategically, adding genuine market value instead of cosmetic upgrades, his return improves further. And if his income accelerated much faster than Eric's, say from $95,000 to $250,000 within several years, the larger fixed payments would become a much smaller percentage of his budget. Those are real scenarios. They're not hypothetical fantasies. They happen. The problem is that many people assume those outcomes before they actually occur. Millionaires usually don't. They plan around average outcomes. Anything better becomes a bonus. Now let's be equally fair to Eric. Investing isn't free money. Markets fall, sometimes dramatically. The S&P 500 has experienced declines of 30% or more multiple times throughout history. If Eric needed cash during one of those downturns, selling investments at depressed prices could permanently reduce future wealth. Investing also demands emotional discipline. Watching a portfolio fall by $80,000 during a bear market feels very different from reading about it. Many investors panic. They sell, then they buy back later after prices recover. That's one of the fastest ways to destroy long-term returns. There's another challenge. Investment accounts aren't as emotionally satisfying as physical assets. You can't walk through an index fund. You can't host friends inside a brokerage account. A larger home delivers daily enjoyment. That's real value. Just because it doesn't appear on a balance sheet doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The mistake isn't spending money on things you love. The mistake is confusing consumption with investment. Those are two different jobs. And asking one purchase to perform both usually ends badly. Because once we reach year 20, the numbers stop being close at all. 20 years pass faster than anyone expects. David is 60. Eric is 60. Both are thinking about retirement for the first time in a serious way. And now, the decision they made at 40 has had 2 full decades to compound. David's larger home has continued appreciating at an average of roughly 3% per year. It's now worth about $1, $1 million. His mortgage is nearly paid off. The remaining balance is around $165,000. On paper, his home equity sits close to $955,000. That sounds incredible, and to be fair, it is. Owning nearly $1 million of equity in a home is an accomplishment. But here's the question almost nobody asks. How much of that wealth is actually available to spend? Unless David sells the house, downsizes, or borrows against it, most of that equity is trapped. It's real wealth, but it's largely illiquid. Meanwhile, property taxes haven't stopped. If taxes average just 1%, 3% of market value, he's now paying roughly $14,500 per year. Insurance premiums have climbed with replacement costs. Routine maintenance on $1 million property is no longer a few $1,000s. A common planning rule is still about 1% of property value annually. That's another $11,000 every year just to keep the house in good condition. Even after the mortgage is nearly gone, the house keeps sending bills. Now let's look at Eric. His home is appreciated too. It's worth roughly $780,000. His remaining mortgage balance is just over $105,000. Home equity? About $675,000. Less than David's. No argument there. But here's where the story completely changes. Eric's investment portfolio has now been compounding for 20 straight years. His original invested savings, his automatic monthly investments, every annual raise, every dividend reinvested, every market recovery. Assuming an average annual return near 8%, his portfolio has grown to approximately $1. $45 million. Read that carefully. $1.45 million. Not because he found the next Apple, not because he bought cryptocurrency at exactly the right time, not because he timed recessions, because he consistently bought productive assets while allowing time to do almost all the heavy lifting. Now combine that with his home equity. Eric's estimated net worth is around $1 million. David's total net worth, including home equity, remaining investments, and other assets, lands closer to $1. $15 million to $1. $3 million depending on market assumptions. The difference? Roughly $800,000 to nearly $1 million. Remember, they started with the same age, the same salary, the same savings, the same city. The only meaningful difference was one decision that affected every paycheck that followed. Now let's talk about something nobody brags about at dinner parties. The number everyone loves talking about is home value. My house is worth over $1 million. My neighborhood doubled. My Zestimate keeps going up. That's the flashy number. But underneath that headline are layers almost nobody mentions. First, transaction costs. Selling a home commonly involves agent commissions, closing costs, transfer taxes, and repairs requested by buyers. Combined, it's often around 6% to 8% of the sale price. On a $1 million property, that's roughly $70,000 before you even receive the proceeds. Second, maintenance. Roofs wear out, HVAC systems fail, driveways crack, exterior paint fades. Over 20 years, major capital expenditures can easily total $60,000 to $120,000 depending on the property. Third, insurance inflation. As replacement costs rise, insurance premiums rise too. Many homeowners budget based on today's premium instead of tomorrow's. Fourth, opportunity cost. Every additional dollar committed to a larger monthly payment is a dollar that can't compound elsewhere. Opportunity cost never sends you a bill. It simply removes future choices. Fifth, lifestyle creep. This may be the most expensive category of all because it rarely appears in spreadsheets. The expensive neighborhood encourages expensive restaurants. The larger garage somehow fills itself. Vacations become slightly nicer. Holiday gifts become slightly bigger. Each increase feels harmless. Together they become permanent. And finally, liquidity. A brokerage account can be sold in minutes during market hours. A house can take weeks or months, sometimes longer. That flexibility has value, especially during retirement. Now, I want to ground all of this in real checkable data. According to the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, the wealth gap between households that consistently own appreciating financial assets and those that primarily build wealth through consumption patterns widens substantially over long time periods. That's not an opinion. It's what the data shows. Historically, the S&P 500 has produced approximately 10% annualized returns before inflation over many decades, although actual yearly returns vary dramatically and future returns are never guaranteed. Again, that's historical data, not a promise. The IRS also allows tax-advantaged retirement accounts like 401ks and IRAs, where investments can grow with significant tax benefits depending on the account type and individual circumstances. Those tax advantages alone can meaningfully increase long-term after-tax wealth. Small decisions, repeated consistently. Now here's the what-if that completely changes everything. What if Eric had invested just $200 more every month? Not $2,000, just $200. Over 20 years, assuming the same long-term return, that additional contribution alone could grow to roughly $118,000 to $140,000 depending on market performance. Think about that. One restaurant meal each week, one smaller car payment, one slightly cheaper vacation. Those trade-offs could become well over 6 figures. That's what compounding actually looks like. Not exciting, not viral, just relentless. So what's the practical strategy? If you're approaching or already past 40, here's a framework worth considering. First, calculate every fixed monthly obligation before you make a major purchase. Not just the payment, include insurance, maintenance, taxes, utilities, repairs, everything. Second, automate investing before increasing your lifestyle. If your raise arrives on Friday, your investment increase should happen before your spending adjusts. That's how you make future discipline effortless. Third, ask one simple question before every major financial decision. Will this purchase create cash flow, increase productive assets, or permanently increase my monthly expenses? Those three answers lead to very different futures. Now let's go back to David and Eric. David walked away believing success should finally look like success. Eric walked away believing success should quietly become success first. Neither man thought he was making a life-changing decision. It felt like a normal financial choice. One bigger house, one different car, one automatic investment. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would ever make the evening news. But 20 years later, those ordinary decisions created an extraordinary gap. And here's the twist. The real decision wasn't about houses. It wasn't about cars. It wasn't even about investing. The real decision was whether future raises would buy freedom or bigger obligations. That's the decision millionaires make differently after 40. Not because they're smarter, not because they earn 10 times more, because they understand that every fixed expense becomes a permanent employee taking money from every future paycheck. The real trap isn't buying a nicer house. The real trap isn't driving a luxury SUV. The real trap is making those decisions based on hype, headlines, social pressure, or someone else's definition of success instead of running the numbers for your own situation. Because your numbers, not your neighbors, not your coworkers, not an influencer's, are the only numbers that matter. And if you're wondering what happens when someone combines both strategies, using appreciating assets while deliberately upgrading lifestyle only after passive income pays for it, that's a completely different conversation. So let me leave you with one question. Did you include everything? Because the answer that includes everything is the only answer that matters. If this video helped you see something you didn't know is there, subscribe to Wealth Blueprint and hit the notification bell. We break down the hidden math behind the financial decisions you face every day.